Thank you all for inviting me. It's very nice to be here. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a very exciting event. I suppose I'm supposed to be the bad guy here because I come from the economics profession, and economists are supposed to be neglecting the problems of environment and problems of sustainability and hoping for everything should be solved by the market and things like that. So I suppose that that's why I'm here. And also economists are supposed to be the villains because we embrace the idea of the need for economic growth for creating a better world. And in a way, I'm guilty to start with. You can start throwing things at me because I would say that economic growth is necessary. Only that what we need to know what we mean by economic growth and how economic growth can serve a good purpose and not be something that destroys life on the planet now and for our children and grandchildren. So that is what I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. I've said the title of my speech is, "Are we approaching an absolute global limit?" I'm going to answer that in a few minutes. No, of course not. I will not be able to answer that because it's a huge topic, of course. But it sets sort of the agenda, and I will not give an answer, but I'll set the agenda for it. My point will be that there is hope for the future, and I agree fully with Maria that technology can solve the problem. Has to be the factor that solves the problem, but we need to think about institution, policies, the way we organize society before we can trust technology to be the savior of the future. Okay, let's start with very quick why we are dealing with this. I mean, we live in a very fast developing world. We have seen in the last couple of decades or 50 years or so a dramatic transformation of the world. Economic growth has sort of have reached levels that we could never dream of in the past. The world is seeing a pace of industrialization that when I was a kid I could never dream of. Since the year I was born, the global workforce has more than trebled the global actually industrial workforce. And we see an enormous global integration, with the movements of capital and increasing trade, and this has also led to an enormous improvements in living standards, of course. Life expectancy, the year I was born in Sweden was 69 years, now it's 81. In India it was 40, now it's 63, 64 I think it is. Almost a level from sort of, 50 years, 55, 60 years ago. And we see increasing improvements in literacy rates, child mortality falling, living standards generally improving dramatically. So we see a lot of very good things. But of course, there are also a lot of problems. We see, of course, global inequality is rising. There are many people left behind in the world. I should say, my perspective on sustainability and economic development is a global perspective. I've dealt all my sort of grown-up life with understanding why some countries can develop and other countries cannot develop. So that is my perspective. It's not sort of the Swedish perspective, although for Sweden is a point of relevance, point of reference to. Many people are left behind in the world, although since 1948, the global population has trebled. We have had an enormous reduction in global poverty. We still have about 1 million people living in extreme poverty. We cannot just ignore that fact. We have to take that as a serious challenge. There is an extreme poverty persisting, and it's mainly in low productive rural areas in poor countries. 85% of the deepest poverty in the world is in agricultural rural areas in the world. Those are the really vulnerable people on the globe. And they will be affected by changes in climate and changes in economic systems that will be detrimental if we don't do anything about it. And of course, then we have the bigger issue of environmental stress. Al Gore talks about global warming and sort of the global CO2 emission problem, of course, but environmental problems are also local. They're created locally, have to be solved locally, of course. So their challenge is this. In the global perspective, we have many challenges. I would say, can we feed the world? That's one thing. Can we feed an increasing population? Do we have the resources and the energy that we need to develop the whole world? Because the whole world needs to be developed. We cannot go on generation after generation saying, yes, there is about 1 billion or 2 billion people left behind. We are solving our problems here, but what about the others? Well, we cannot go on neglecting that. We have to do something about that. But then, of course, this is a huge challenge. If we want to develop the world, can we then handle, it's not only that we have the resources, can we handle the waste problem? I call it the waste problem, emissions. As a kind of big waste, whether it's sort of local waste or local pollution of air and water and so on. Also, I call sort of global emissions of CO2 also a kind of waste problem, because it's something that has to be, economically we call it an externality, that has to be solved somehow. So can we solve that problem? Can we handle that problem? And the sustainability concern is this, of course. Sustainability is a kind of can I say, elusive concept, because who can be against sustainability? Aren't we all wanting sustainability? Who can say, no, I'm for some change, but not for sustainability? Nobody would say that. Of course we are. But on the other hand, I could say the opposite. Who can be for sustainability? What is sustainable? Nothing is sustainable in the long run. The world is changing, constantly changing in some direction, and we have to know where it's going, and we have to go with it, and we have to adjust with it. We cannot think of a sustainability that will last forever. Sustainability means no change, and no change is a static world, and it means, in the end, reversal. So that's what it. But the challenge, of course, is this. Some people say we are too many. Are we that? Are we using too much resources? Are we producing too much? Are we consuming too much? Are we wasting too much of the global resource? These are the challenges, of course, and we need to have. But the dilemma, to my mind, is this. Can the whole world be developed without increasing the strain on resources and environment? And I say, no, probably not. Because if we want to lift the billions that are left behind, really, and give them a reasonably decent life, sort of, not automatically, but in the coming generations, which we're talking about 20 or some years ahead and so on, there has to be more use of resources, there has to be different ways of resources, but the strain will be there. We cannot ignore that fact. We have to live with that ugly fact, I would say, in the short run. But the second question is, can we protect the environment without developing the whole world? I mean, in my historical perspective of the world development, I would say no. We all have to be developed somehow. Only by bringing in sort of the poorest of the world, sort of, in the coming generation, can we have a world which can become reasonably sustainable in the sense that we talked about before, that we can feed all the people, we can use resources more efficiently, and we can handle the waste. Because as it is now, with a still growing population of living under very poor conditions, with very primitive technologies, in large parts of the world, especially in Africa, but not only, also in Latin America and in parts of Asia, then of course, the strain on the environment will remain very high, not only from what we are doing here, but also very much from what poor people are doing to the environment. So we have to solve this problem. We have to do. So there are two no's here that we cannot avoid, I think. We cannot protect the environment without developing the world in the long run. But of course, here I think Maria talked very well about sort of technology versus what politicians can do. And I think this is actually exactly what we have to talk about. Technology is, of course, the driver of economic and social change, and for also protecting the environment. There's no doubt about that. And politicians cannot solve the problem. They can talk and then talk, but technology will not solve the problem unless we see it also in a societal perspective. So technology is sort of the permissive force. It will make it happen, but it cannot happen in a vacuum. There must be regulation, there must be political decisions taken. We must choose the preferences we have. And here we have the dilemma. And this is something that annoys me from an economic development point of view, because we all embrace the second definition of sustainability, the Brundtland Commission's definition, that sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generation to meet their need. Who's against? Nobody can be against that, because this is a very important thing. But there is also another definition that's sort of lingering around, which is the UNESCO definition, that says that every generation should leave the environment, leave nature as it was when it came. It should not touch the environment. It should sort of preserve the environment in a way. And read that definition carefully. You can see it's an unrealistic definition. The problem is that in the sustainability debate, we think that we embrace the Brundtland definition, but sometimes we behave and think and talk as if it was the other definition. And the first definition is very, very problematic. It's an anti-modern, it's a very, I would say, reactionary sort of attitude towards society and towards change. It means no change, it means conservation, don't touch, and it's an anti-human. The Brundtland Commission definition is human. It says human first, and it promotes development, only that we have to care about the environment and our resources. But I think that in the discourse we have a tendency to not say we need a new era of economic growth, but we don't need economic growth. And that then becomes very dangerous when it's no more economic growth. That is what we should promote. So if we define sustainability by nature first, we end up in a lot of things that could be very difficult to defend in the long run, because it means a complete attack on the necessity of economic growth. Because then, in my mind, economic growth means that things that we have to do to make life better on Earth. We cannot revert to a society where there was very slow economic growth or no economic growth, because that meant poverty to the people. And we cannot have that. But if we say that economic growth is unsustainable per se, we have to build a society without economic growth, and then we think about conservation. This is the problem. So the anti-growth model means that we produce less, we use alternative energies, which is of course something we have to do anyway, because fossil energy will be depleted sooner or later. But it means worse. It means that we should move over to only local production. We should not trade so much. We should have small-scale production, and we should have, especially in developing countries, organic, ecological farming. Some of these seem very relevant to us in the Western world. We should be thinking about these things. Organic farming is great and so on. In the developing world, it's not a solution. It's not a solution. So in the growth view, of course, we have an extremist version of this, which follows the UNESCO definition of sustainable development. I'm against that. I'm for the pragmatic, policy-relevant view on the critics of growth. Sort of, I can go along with that. The problem is, in the debate when we seek solutions, I see sometimes the more extremist views taking over. And there is a problem here, because we come to the economic growth model. Who are the enemies, sort of? When environmentalists talk about economists as the villains, they often talk about the extremists, those who think that the market will solve everything. The market, there's automatic improvements. Just let the market rule, and then there needs to be no intervention or anything, because the market will solve any problem. A more pragmatic, policy-relevant view is, of course, that there needs to be policy interventions, and that if we go on with accepting inequality to grow and resource depletion to grow, if we set ourselves in a situation where resources are depleted and the environment is destroyed, well, the economic growth will not exist, because it will be undermined, of course. And that is the more pragmatic. So here we have to meet. The discourse on sustainability between economists and environmentalists is often between the extremists. And we should seek the middle ground, thinking about the pragmatic solution. between those who are pragmatic on both sides. And we should be, I can critically say, sometimes, even from the economy, if I accuse environmentalists who sometimes listen too much to their extremists, sometimes, of course, the economic discourse has sometimes, in the last couple of decades or so, been taken over a lot by sort of the extremists. Everything should be run by the market. And we have been so a bit too much of accepting that view. Why I think there is hope anyway is this. Because many of the things that we talk about is not so serious as Al Gore might have thought. Economic growth is exponential, it's often said. It means that we go on with the type of economic growth we have now, and we have a certain growth rate. Over some years or so, the growth volumes the produced volumes will be doubled, and then after a few years we will have a doubling and doubling and doubling. And so this is a mathematical expression. But economic growth in society is not that, because we don't produce the same thing. It's not that we produce potatoes. We produce different things. We start by potatoes and come up with mobile phones. And after mobile phones, we come up with something we can never imagine in the future. We don't know what kind of products we are thinking of. So the content, either timber logs, or production of healthcare, that's very different components in the economic system. So we are moving towards different compositions. It's not exponential. So that's a good thing. Secondly, we can feed the world. There is no food crisis. We can feed the world. We have already fed the world. Georg Borgström was one of my favorites way back in the 60s when I started to become interested in the global. He thought that maximum population on the globe was 6 billion people. After that, we will have famine, unless we reorganize agriculture. Well, I have the same concern in a way, because I think if we don't reorganize agriculture in the developing countries and really go for modernizing agriculture, it will not be a food crisis, because the rich world has, with the subsidies and with the technology, we can feed the world, no doubt about that. Even Skåne could feed large part of the developing world, but we can do that. But this is not a world we need. We need a transformation. We need an agricultural development that makes people in the poor countries have better opportunities, choices available for them, so they can make choices. And so that's how we should look. Population is exploding, some people say. I heard that only a few days ago and read it in some of the newspapers. Now we should do something about the population explosion. It comes up over and over and over again, that question, which is just so silly that it sort of beats me how we can do. We know now that if we have development and structural transformation, modernization of societies, norm systems change, and the need for children goes down. Only if we can develop Africa, for instance. Africa is now the outlier. We don't know if the world will stabilize at 9 billion or will we go on. And the trick is what will happen in Africa. If Africa develops the way I think, then surely we will have a stabilization on about 9 billion. If it doesn't, it will go on. So that development is an imperative again. Organic farming. Can it be a solution? The United Nations organization has a unit called Division for the Right to Food, and they have a rapporteur there who writes a lot of stuff where they argue that the only method for developing the poorest of the poor agriculture in the world is organic farming. I'm afraid I'm saying no. You're cheating. It's great to have organic farming. It's great, but you cannot solve the world problem with that. I agree with Georg Borgström in 1966. You must have better technical solution. And we know, we've all researched that organic farming works, but it's a supplement. It's a supplement, not as the only alternative. But there are technologies available, no doubt about that. Just choose them and go from there. And there will be no new technology. The peak oil, I said, is not a cause of economic crisis. This is a peculiarity. Why is it, if we are running out of the oil resources, that oil prices haven't skyrocketed yet? Why is that so? We can say, okay, politicians are subsidizing the oil industry and the coal producers, which of course is happening, but we haven't subsidized the oil market. We haven't done that. So there's something else going on here that we don't know. And of course we have a problem, because sooner or later we know that prices will come to us, they will go up, and then we will have a sort of a problem with and then it might be very late to start promoting other energy sources and other technologies. But it's not now that the peak oil has also caused an economic crisis. Don't make that mistake. There are other more deeply rooted causes of the economic crisis than peak oil. Peak oil is lingering there, hoping to take over and cause a crisis. And finally, I think the resources, are they depleted? Yes. We know the resources we know might be depleted, many of them. But there is one thing which is related to the technology concept, and that is that the more we know, the more we develop our science and so on, the more resources we detect, the more we invent the resources, sort of in a sense. I mean, many of the resources that we have built our society on were never resources before we started using them, before the knowledge that we developed found out that, okay, there's something underground that could be made, something can be made fuel of. The fossils were there, but not the fuel. The fuel was made out of science, sort of. So there can be other resources that we have no idea. As Maria said, there are things we have no idea about that can be used with other technologies, with better knowledge and so on. So it's not an absolute concept, and nor is natural capital. Nature capital, it's not, because nature is there, but we humans make it into capital. It's not there, oh, there's the capital there. We make it capital, and that is because our perception and our knowledge makes it capital. So that is why it's hope. Relating to Maria's talk again, technology and institutions. Technology will have to be there. But Simon Kuznets, Nobel laureate in 1973, one of the greatest economists the world has ever seen, and somebody that everybody should read when you want to know something about economic development. He said exactly this. Technology, of course, is the driver, but it's only the permissive force. You cannot just hope that science will solve the problem for you if you are not concerned, if you don't adapt your thinking or your institutions or your norm systems and so on. Technology cannot live its own life. But it means that you have to make the right decisions. You have to know what you mean by sustainability and what kind of choices you're doing. I'm afraid that some of the sustainability political decisions become protectionist. They propose suggestions and solutions to poor people in the world that are not sustainable because they are not productive enough. And they encourage a kind of protectionist, homegrown thinking in in our world that is globally not morally sustainable, I think. I heard our Minister of Agriculture about a year ago talking about organic agriculture, the dramatic increase in organic agriculture we had in Sweden. And he said one thing. He said something that scared me a bit. I laughed when I heard it, but I scared me. He said he was very proud of two things. One, that organic agriculture had exploded in Sweden. It was so fantastic that we didn't have to import so much of these goods from Europe. That was the first thing he was happy about. The second thing was that Swedish agriculture was exporting so much. Now, it never happened before, but he didn't see the contradiction. This is a way of thinking that as a protectionist, we should sell but not buy. And if we have a world like that, we're in trouble. We should be going. But I should like to stop by this. There's hope, because every generation tends to see the limits, and we think. And when I see Al Gore, I'm a bit scared, because he is some people would call him a scaremonger, because one would also think there is hope, there are solutions, and we tend in every generation to look for the disaster. We think that now Thomas Robert Malthus has been finally proven right, some people. I read a PhD or thesis from our university just recently about that. Right, Malthus was proven wrong for 200 years, but now it's wrong because now resources are depleted. So now it's, and now the catastrophe is here. So I don't think so. Every generation has underestimated the potential for finding new recipes and ideas. This is what it is. But, and we failed to grasp how many ideas remain to be discovered. And we should be concerned, but when the choice of policy and technology is made, we should put humans first, I think. Thank you.